Good morning. It is what time? 9:10 a.m. on Sunday, January 28th, 2018. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. Today is Sunday, which means I'm continuing my rewatch of Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex with episode 12, Tachikoma Runs Away, and the movie director's dream, Escape from. I love this episode. It's a standalone episode, meaning it doesn't it doesn't really relate to the Laughing Man case at all. But and it's really a kind of two separate mini episodes that are tangentially related. But I love both of them. I just think it's a great exploration of a couple of things, and also the furthering of the Tachikoma storyline, which I've mentioned a couple of times as being something that was slowly developing, but this is the sort of the first big break in that storyline, so to speak, because one of the Tachikomas, in theory, these robot tanks with the chirpy little girls, AI personality, they're supposed to all be the same, right? They're identical in terms of their hardware, and they all synchronize all of their experiences and memories every day. So they should all be the same, right? And yet, one of them finds itself awake and activated when none of the others are, and it decides to sneak out on its own and go exploring. Which, on the one hand, from the perspective of imagining this as a little girl with this little girl's personality, it's kind of adorable. But on the other hand, if you think of it from a strictly practical perspective, this is an incredibly advanced, very powerful, very expensive robotic tank that belongs to a highly specialized branch of the police slash military that is going rogue, and who knows what it might do. That's very bad. And yet, there is also the aspect of the AI inside is like a little girl. She's curious. She wants to explore. And so that's why I think the animation does a very great job of showing us this, sort of young teenage looking girl standing, watching, facial expression very much like the Major, so that I think even the instant we see her, even though it doesn't physically, it's not the same body we've seen the Major in before, I think everybody immediately sees that girl and says, oh, yeah, that's the Major. She's following, she's spying, which simultaneously gives us a little bit of a sense of relief that she's, got an eye on the situation, but also helps us to watch this storyline through multiple eyes, multiple viewpoints. Tea. But so the Tachikoma is, kind of just exploring. It is finding it somewhat exhilarating to be out and about without specific orders or mission parameters. And so it's kind of just, rolling around, going to different areas. And then it runs into this little girl who asks for help. The little girl, interesting, it's just interesting little world building details that this little girl is not scared of this big robot tank at all. And in fact, acts like it's more or less, maybe not an everyday thing, but certainly not something with which she is entirely unfamiliar. In any case, this little girl says, my dog, Locky, is missing. I need help looking for him. And we have the Tachikoma, who initially is a little bit reluctant because it had planned to go into town to explore, but agrees, you know what, hey, I will go with you to the town to look for your dog. And there's some initial searching around, and they have just various little interactions. A good reminder for us that no matter how she actually, again, or it, the Tachikoma, just because I'll just go ahead and call it she, because that's what the voice sounds like, and we don't have, it's a complicated issue whether the AI has any kind of a gender at all. But we can assume that since the voice is very much like a little girl, we can say that it is presenting as a little girl. In any event, though, a reminder to us that this is not just a regular little girl, even internally, is when the Tachikoma sees another dog and basically just grabs it in a very rough way. It's very practical in terms of seizing it, and it doesn't look like it's probably initially physically harmed from the grab, but it certainly is very unhappy about being held up by a robot claw, and then just tossed aside when the girl confirms it's not Lucky. And the girl is mad at the Tachikoma, just saying, why, you don't have to be so mean. And the Tachikoma really didn't understand. It's, what do you mean? That wasn't the one you wanted. What do you care? Like, why, that one was of no use to you. And so this idea that it learns about, the idea that you be nice even when you gain nothing from it. There's also a fun little gag in the subtitles in the sense that the little girl says, sees some, a street vendor selling little meat skewers and says, oh, I'm going to buy one for my dog. But then the Tachikoma looks and sees that the store's name is called Red Dog and suggests, maybe you don't want to feed that one to your dog. I don't think it's necessarily supposed to be obvious to us that the vendor is actually selling dog meat so much as that the Tachikoma drew that conclusion from the name. Anyway, I also just as just a funny little detail, when they first meet and agree to look together, the little girl holds out her hand like to shake, and the Tachikoma holds out its little pincer and rotates the wrist in a way that obviously human can't do, and so the little girl even just kind of goes. And I think, that's just a perfect little detail, just sort of showing that there is this disconnect there, no matter how much, I think in a lot of ways, mentally, we are prepared for the idea that a robot that acts like a person, you can more or less just treat it like it's a person. But there's a few things in this story that are reminders that, on the one hand, maybe you shouldn't do that because it's fundamentally really not a person in many important respects. But other aspects of the story kind of pull it back the other way of saying, well, but maybe those differences aren't as important as maybe you think they are. And I love just that ambiguity of it. And, that's part of what I love about this show and Ghost in Shell stuff in general. But so in any event, at one point during the searching, the Tachikoma finds this little cyber brain that becomes more critical in the second half of the story. But again, just immediately dives into it and then backs away when it says, oh, a ghost, meaning there's like a person in there. And the little girl scolds it for stealing. But then when police show up and are suspicious that the little girl is by herself with a big robot tank, the Tachikoma impersonates the Chief Aramaki, suggesting that they basically given the police the brush off. It's like, oh, I'm the girl's grandfather, and my body was injured in the war. Now I'm stuck in this robot. Aramaki doesn't speak with the accent, but you get the point. In any event, we have lots of kind of fun little misadventures there, but there's still a tension because, as we saw with the other dog, the Tachikoma doesn't necessarily have a full understanding of what it means to be mean or kind, or really even life or death. And so there's a scene where they're going across the bridge to where this girl says she wants to look for her dog. And the girl tells the story of the secret goldfish. And the short version of the story is that a girl had a pet goldfish that died, but she kept telling everybody that it was just a secret, and they can't see it because it's just hers, and she doesn't want anybody to see it. And it's a sad story, but the girl is basically kind of saying that she had been sad for the goldfish already, but now she didn't want the grown-ups to be sad for her or to try to convince her to do something else that she doesn't want to do. And I think, attentive viewers will probably conclude just from hearing that story that Lockie is probably not alive. And so we get that confirmed when this place, this neighborhood that the girl had described, turns out to be a cemetery, and cemetery with the dog grave just right in there amongst all the others apparently. But that's fine. But sure enough, yeah, it's confirmation for her, and we discover that she didn't know really. She just suspected, but it was just a case of, her dog had been sick, and then her parents told her that he just ran away. And on the one hand, I feel like we can sort of want to criticize those parents. They're like, what the? That's. But again, I guess it's, it's like the girl herself feels like she would rather her parents think that the lie was successful so that they are not sad. Because clearly they told the lie because they didn't want the girl to be sad. So it's a weird sort of non-communicative way for both sides of that relationship to try to spare the other pain. It's kind of beautiful, even though I think healthier would be for both of them to come clean with the other. But in any event, there's a discussion with the girl in the Tachikoma about how the Tachikoma kind of struggles to process this life and death stuff, understanding humans sure seem to get sad when someone that they like dies. I don't really understand because I can't die at all. And what's interesting here is that what we see happen is that even though the Tachikoma's voice stays that still sort of cheery, sort of upbeat sort of tone, it doesn't sound sad. It sounds like it's just talking very matter of fact about stuff that it has no real strong feelings about. But we see oil start to drip around one of its little eyes like tears. And I think we can recognize, that's something's happening there. What's going on there? That's interesting. Sure enough, the Tachikoma is brought back to base, and the experts there, Ishikawa and Bato, are talking about it because this is apparently the one that Bato has, the Tachikoma unit that Bato uses exclusively, and because he's weird like that, he has been giving it, quote, natural oil instead of the synthetic oils. And they basically conclude that, boy, this is something no one would have predicted, but apparently there was this weird interaction with the way this one processes memories in the natural oil that produced this aberrant behavior. And there's kind of a simultaneous sense of, that's really interesting. And, Ishikawa basically says, if this was an AI laboratory, this would be a big breakthrough. But what this is instead is you did something that made an extremely powerful, expensive, dangerous piece of AI robotic technology go rogue, which is probably not good. In particular, when the Major kind of shows back up, she's basically saying, yeah, that wasn't good. So, don't do that anymore. No more natural oil. And so they're essentially going to try to corral that behavior. But it's interesting from our perspective because I feel like we probably instinctively feel like them developing that individuality feels like a good thing, even though certainly from a standpoint of public safety, Security Section 9 probably would not want that to happen. It's if you have this AI thing that's supposed to, like, part of its value to the team is that its behavior is predictable. So, in any event, they also decide to look into this cyber brain that the Tachikoma found on its adventure, which is what leads us to that second part of the story, which is short enough to describe because it's basically they send one of their techs into it and he doesn't want to come out. And they're not sure why, and it's a little suspicious. It feels like it's a trap of some kind. But the Major goes into it herself and discovers that it's essentially simulating a movie theater, playing a very specific movie. It's apparently so good that lots of people have connected up into it and essentially sent their ghost, their consciousness, into this cyberbrain to just stay there forever and just watch this movie over and over. And we don't see anything of the movie. We only see the flickering of the screen, but we see that the Major briefly looks at the screen, and it's actually not clear how much time passes, but she finds herself starting to cry. From what we know of the Major, that's got to be a hell of a movie. Make the Major cry? Just while she's standing there, knowing that this is potentially a dangerous situation. She has her hand on the tech's shoulder telling him to get up and leave. And even under those circumstances, she finds herself starting to cry. That's got to be a hell of a movie. And so, ultimately, though, because she has a conversation with what turns out to be the director of this movie, essentially just talking about the virtue of escapism. Like it's a fine thing to have, but it can't be permanent because then you might as well just be dead. And he offers the counterpoint that, a lot of the people in here don't have good realities to go back to. They would just have misery and suffering if they went back to the real world. And so who are you to tell them that they should go back to that suffering instead of staying here where they're happy? And the Major's unconvinced, but she also doesn't force everyone to leave or anything. She does, once she comes back out, immediately just go, and everyone's thinking this is a weird sort of tricky moral quandary situation, and she's just like, no, there's lots of laws being broken here, so let's just do that. Disconnect him so he can't connect to the network anymore, and we're going to investigate the guy who was selling him for human trafficking. And, so she's very pragmatic there, but it's interesting just that, through the story being told to us, the conveyance of a movie that was so beautiful that it made the Major cry. And that's just interesting to contemplate. And it obviously really moved her, even though she was able to come out and do her job because she's very professional. It clearly moved her. And I think that's interesting. And also just the idea of this director that had a story that he felt he wanted to tell and it was important, but he just couldn't ever make it work as a collaborative thing. So he just did it on his own. He essentially created like a little indie game version of the movie in a way that he could do it by himself and required people to connect in. But once they did, they didn't want to leave. It's good stuff. I love the show. Good episode. So I think that'll do it this time, though. And so next time, we're going to be talking about episode 13, Unequal Terrorist, Not Equal, which is another standalone episode. And then I'll talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.